Good morning. Now, as we've decided that this week is all about science, I've decided to read part of one of my favourite Roald Dahl books, George's Marvellous Medicine. Now, I'm not going to read all of it, because you can go and read that for yourself or get your parents to read it to you. But George has been left in charge of his grandma, and she's just started to demand her medicine. So George has decided to create his own. So we'll start with George begins to make the medicine. George took an enormous saucepan out of the cupboard and placed it on the kitchen table. "George!" came the voice from the next room. "What are you doing?" "Nothing, Grandma," he called out. "You needn't think I can't hear you just because you closed the door. You're rattling the saucepans." "I'm just tidying the kitchen, Grandma." Then there was silence. George had absolutely no doubts whatsoever about how he was going to make his famous medicine. He was going to fool about, wondering whether to put in a little bit of this or a little bit of that. Quite simply, he was going to put in everything he could find. There would be no messing about. No hesitating, no wondering whether a particular thing would knock the old girl sideways or not. The rule would be this: whatever he saw, if it was runny or powdery or gooey, in it went. Nobody had ever made a medicine like that before. If it didn't actually cure Grandma, then it would anyway cause some exciting results. It would be worth watching. George decided to work his way round the various rooms one at a time and see what they had to offer. He would go first to the bathroom. There are always lots of funny things in a bathroom. So upstairs he went, carrying the enormous two-handled saucepan before him. In the bathroom he gazed longingly at the famous and dreaded medicine cupboard. But he didn't go near it. It was the only thing in the entire house he was forbidden to touch. He had made solemn promises to his parents about this, and he wasn't going to break them. There were things in there, they had told him, that could actually kill a person, and although he was out to give Grandma a pretty fiery mouthful, he didn't really want a dead body on his hands. George put the saucepan on the floor and went to work. Number 1 was a bottle labelled Golden Gloss Hair Shampoo. He emptied it into the pan. "That ought to wash her tummy nice and clean," he said. He took a full tube of toothpaste and squeezed out the whole lot of it in one long worm. "Maybe that will brighten up those horrid brown teeth of hers," he said. There was an aerosol can of superfoam shaving soap belonging to his father. George loved playing with aerosols. He pressed the button and kept his finger on it until there was nothing left. A wonderful mountain of white foam built up in the giant saucepan. With his fingers, he scooped out the contents of a jar of vitamin-enriched face cream. In went a small bottle of scarlet nail varnish. "Well, if the toothpaste doesn't clean her teeth," George said, "then this will paint them as red as roses." He found another jar of creamy stuff labelled hair remover. "Smear it on your legs," it said, "and allow to remain for 5 minutes." George tipped it all into the saucepan. There was a bottle with yellow stuff inside it called Dishworth's Famous Dandruff Cure. In it went. There was something called Brilident for cleaning false teeth. It was a white powder. In that went too. He found another aerosol can. "Nevermore Ponking Deodorant Spray, guaranteed," it said, "to keep away unpleasant body smells for a whole day." "She could use plenty of that," George said, as he sprayed the entire canful into the saucepan. Liquid paraffin, the next one was called. It was a big bottle. He hadn't the faintest idea what it did to you, but he poured it in anyway. That, he thought, looking around him, was about all from the bathroom. On his mother's dressing table in the bedroom, George found yet another lovely aerosol can. It was called Helga's Hair Set. Hold 12 inches away from the hair and spray lightly. He squirted the whole lot into the saucepan. He did enjoy squirting these aerosols. There was a bottle of perfume called Flowers of Turnips. It smelt of old cheese, but in it went, and in too went a large round box of powder. It was called pink plaster. There was a powder puff on top, and he threw that in as well, for luck. He found a couple of lipsticks, and he pulled the greasy red things out of their little cases and added them to the mixture. The bedroom had nothing more to offer, so George carried the enormous saucepan downstairs again and trotted into the laundry room, where the shelves were full of all kinds of household items. The first one he took down was a large box of super white for automatic washing machines. "Dirt," it said, "will disappear like magic." George didn't know whether Grandma was automatic or not, but she was certainly a dirty old woman, so she'd better have it all, he said, tipping in the whole boxful. Then there was a big tin of Waxwell floor polish. "It removes filth and foul messes from your floor and leaves everything shiny bright," it said. George scooped the orange-coloured waxy stuff out of the tin and plonked it into the pan. There was a round cardboard carton labelled "Flea powder for dogs. Keep well away from the dog's food," it said, "because this powder, if eaten, will make the dog explode." "Good," said George, pouring it all into the saucepan. He found a box of canary seed on the shelf. "Perhaps it'll make the old birds sing," he said, and in it went. Next, George explored the box with shoe-cleaning materials, brushes and tins and dusters. "Well now," he thought, "Grandma's medicine is brown, so my medicine must also be brown, or she'll smell a rat. The way to colour it," he decided, "would be with brown shoe polish." The large tin he chose was labelled dark tan. Splendid. He scooped it all out with an old spoon and plopped it into the pan. He would stir it up later. On his way back to the kitchen, George saw a bottle of gin standing on the sideboard. Grandma was very fond of gin. She was allowed to have a small nip of it every evening. Now he would give her a treat. He would pour in the whole bottle. He did. Back in the kitchen, George put the huge saucepan on the table and went over to the cupboard that served as a larder. The shelves were bulging with bottles and jars of every sort. He chose the following and emptied them one by one into the saucepan. A tin of curry powder, a tin of mustard powder, a bottle of extra hot chili sauce, a tin of black peppercorns, a bottle of horseradish sauce. "There," he said aloud. "That should do it." "George!" came the voice from the next room. "Who are you talking to in there? What are you up to?" "Nothing, Grandma. Absolutely nothing," he called back. "Is it time for my medicine yet?" "No, Grandma. Not for about half an hour." "Well, just see you don't forget it." "I won't, Grandma," George answered. "I promise I won't." At this point, George suddenly had an extra good wheeze. Although the medicine cupboard in the house was forbidden ground, what about the medicines his father kept on the shelf in the shed next to the hen house? The animal medicines. What about those? Nobody had ever told him he mustn't touch them. Let's face it, George said to himself, hairspray and shaving cream and shoe polish are all very well, and they will no doubt cause some splendid explosions inside the old geezer, but what the magic mixture now needs is a touch of the real stuff, real pills and real tonics, to give it punch and muscle. George picked up the heavy 3/4 full saucepan and carried it out of the back door. He crossed the farmyard and headed straight for the shed alongside the hen house. He knew his father wouldn't be there. He was out haymaking in one of the fields. George entered the dusty old shed and put the saucepan on the bench. Then he looked up at the medicine shelf. There were 5 big bottles there. 2 were full of pills, 2 were full of runny stuff, and 1 was full of powder. "I'll use them all," George said. "Grandma needs them. Boy, does she need them." The first bottle he took down contained an orange-coloured powder. The label said, "For chickens with fowl pest, hen gripe, sore beaks, gammy legs, coccolitis, egg trouble, broodiness or loss of feathers. Mix 1 spoonful only with each bucket of feed." "Well," George said aloud to himself as he tipped in the whole bottleful, "the old bird won't be losing any feathers after she's had a dose of this." The next bottle he took down had about 500 gigantic purple pills in it. "For horses with horse throats," it said on the label. "The horse-throated horse should suck 1 pill twice a day." "Grandma may not have a hoarse throat," George said, "but she's certainly got a sharp tongue. Maybe they'll cure that instead." Into the saucepan went the 500 gigantic purple pills. Then there was a bottle of thick, yellowish liquid. "For cows, bulls and bullocks," the label said. "Will cure cowpox, cow mange, crumpled horns, bad breath in bulls, earache, toothache, headache, hoofache, tail-ache and sore udders." "That grumpy old cow in the living room has every one of these rotten illnesses," George said. "She'll need it all." And with a slop and a gurgle, the yellow liquid splashed into the now nearly full saucepan. The next bottle contained a brilliant red liquid. "Sheep dip," it said on the label. "For sheep with sheep rot and for getting rid of ticks and fleas. Mix 1 spoonful in 1 gallon of water and slosh it over the sheep. Caution! Do not make the mixture any stronger or the wool will fall out and the animal will be naked." "By gum," said George, "how I'd love to walk in and slosh it all over old Grandma and watch the ticks and fleas go jumping off her. But I can't, I mustn't, so she'll have to drink it instead." He poured the bright red medicine into the saucepan. The last bottle on the shelf was full of pale green pills. "Pig pills," the label announced. "For pigs with pork prickles, tender trotters, bristle blight and swine sickness. Give 1 pill per day. In severe cases 2 pills may be given, but more than that will make the pig rock and roll." "Just the stuff," said George, "for that miserable old pig back there in the house. She'll need a very big dose." He tipped all the green pills, hundreds and hundreds of them, into the saucepan. There was an old stick lying on the bench that had been used for stirring paint. George picked it up and started to stir his marvellous concoction. The mixture was as thick as cream, and as he stirred and stirred, many wonderful colours rose up from the depths and blended together, pinks, blues, greens, yellows and browns. George went on stirring until it was all well mixed, but even so there were still hundreds of pills lying on the bottom that hadn't melted, and there was his mother's splendid powder puff floating on the surface. "I shall have to boil it all up," George said. "1 good quick boil on the stove is all it needs." And with that he staggered back towards the house with the enormous heavy saucepan. On the way he passed the garage, so he went in to see if he could find any other interesting things, and he added the following: 1/2 a pint of engine oil, to keep Grandma's engine going smoothly, some antifreeze, to keep her radiator from freezing up in winter, a handful of grease, to grease her creaking joints, and then it was back to the kitchen. In the kitchen, George put the saucepan on the stove and turned up the gas flame underneath it as high as it would go. "George!" came the awful voice from the next room. "It's time for my medicine." "Not yet, Grandma," George called back. "There's still 20 minutes before 11 o'clock. "What mischief are you up to in there?" Granny screeched. "I hear noises." George thought it best not to answer this one. He found a long wooden spoon in a kitchen drawer and began stirring hard. The stuff in the pot got hotter and hotter. Soon the marvellous mixture began to froth and foam. A rich blue smoke, the colour of peacocks, rose from the surface of the liquid, and a fiery, fearsome smell filled the kitchen. It made George choke and splutter. It was a smell unlike any he had smelt before. It was a brutal and bewitching smell, spicy and staggering, fierce and frenzied, full of wizardry and magic. Whenever he got a whiff of it up his nose, firecrackers went off in his skull and electric prickles ran along the backs of his legs. It was wonderful to stand there, stirring this amazing mixture, and to watch it smoking blue and bubbling and frothing and foaming as though it were alive. At one point, he could have sworn he saw bright sparks flashing in the swirly foam. And suddenly, George found himself dancing around the steaming pot, chanting strange words that came into his head out of nowhere. Fiery broth and witch's brew, foamy froth and riches blue, fume and spume and spoon-drift spray, fizzle, swizzle, shout, hooray! Watch it sloshing, swashing, sploshing, hear it hissing, squishing, spissing, Grandma better start to pray. Now, if you want to find out what happened to Grandma when George had finished his medicine, then do have a look and see if you can find George's Marvellous Medicine by Roald Dahl and see exactly what happened. Now, it is Science Week. It is a chance for you to explore and have a go at lots of different things to do with science, but don't forget to be safe. Don't go around your own house looking for lots of things to put into a saucepan, but have a go at doing something scientific. Find some information out and maybe ask your parents, can you take a photograph, can you take a video and send it in to us for Star of the Week Assembly. There is science on everybody's home learning again this week, so please do get involved and let's all be scientific. Have a great week and don't forget to find out what happened to Grandma.